Did you know that in just a few weeks, nearly $1.4 trillion have disappeared from the global financial markets? The US dollar, often called the king of currencies, is facing unprecedented changes. Is this the sign of an imminent decline, or just a mild flu for the greenback? There's a story that China's central bank, the People's Bank of China, sent an email to over 400 major export companies, telling them to stop using the US dollar in new contracts and switch to the renminbi or other currencies. Sounds like a historic turn, right? But wait, reliable sources like Reuters and Bloomberg have not confirmed this clearly. In reality, the PBOC only advised state banks to reduce USD purchases and foreign exchange reserves, a strategic but cautious step. If a sudden ban had actually happened, do you think global financial markets could stay calm? Absolutely not. So maybe this is just an exaggeration or a misunderstanding. This shows us that in the international currency world, every decision is weighed carefully because the consequences are massive. The 10-year U.S. Treasury yield is around 4.54%. That sounds high, but it is not the highest in over 20 years. In 2001, yields were even higher, regarding the $25.7 billion that left global bond funds in 1 week. Yes, this number is real, but that is a global figure, not just the U.S. Outflows from U.S. funds are much smaller. So what really causes these volatilities? The Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes, inflation fears, trade tensions, and global political uncertainty. We should not just blame China. Financial markets are a complex web of multiple factors. In China, the renminbi is now the most used currency in cross-border domestic transactions, nearly 50%. That sounds impressive, right? But on a global scale, the renminbi only accounts for about 3.5% of total international payments, modest compared to the US dollar and euro dominance. What about the Mbridge project? Blockchain technology enabling fast payments without the USD or the outdated SWIFT system sounds exciting. However, Mbridge is still in testing and operates on a limited scale. In other words, the renminbi is rising, but it is not an immediate replacement. This race is just beginning, with a long road ahead. Did you know that China surpassed the US in total merchandise trade value back in 2013? And exports jumped 8.1% in April 2025? Clearly, this giant remains strong, but the claim that 70% of the global economy trades more with China than the US? That is not proven and might be an overstatement. The export surge mainly reflects businesses rushing before US tariffs were applied. International trade is far more complex than simple numbers, many interconnected forces at play. So always keep a healthy skepticism when hearing big numbers like these. Despite challenges, the US holds key tools sustaining its economic dominance. Flexible monetary policy lets the Fed react quickly to changes, balancing inflation and growth. Strong trade negotiation power helps keep the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. The US is also developing a national digital currency to modernize finance and maintain leadership. While slow adaptation may raise borrowing costs and test confidence, the dollar's roots go far deeper. The US financial system is one of the most liquid and connected worldwide, encouraging global use of the greenback. Geopolitical influence and institutions like the IMF further support the dollar's stability and global acceptance. In short, the US dollar is not stepping down soon. It remains the king of global finance with powerful cards in hand.
1 trillion USD, the amount China had previously invested in American companies, from Hollywood to Wall Street, is now frozen. Why did China decide to freeze this massive investment? On March 17, 2025, China suddenly froze all investments in the US, reducing the capital flow from $46 billion in 2016 to just $0 in 2025. This not only shocked investors, but also sent shock waves through US companies and financial institutions. This is the result of prolonged tensions between the two nations and escalating protectionist policies. Along with liquidating US bonds, China also reduced loans to US businesses, forcing many companies to seek alternative funding sources from domestic funds, increasing costs and financial risks for companies. This has lowered the stability of the financial markets and negatively impacted international investors' confidence in the U.S. economy. The broader impact is also clear. Foreign direct investment in the U.S. dropped by 22% in 2024 and is expected to decrease by an additional 19% in 2025. Not stopping there, investment flows from international funds continued to withdraw from U.S. ETFs, with $120 billion pulled out in the first 90 days of 2025. This puts additional pressure on the U.S. economy as investment from major partners is being replaced by alternatives from countries no longer dependent on the U.S. American companies will face a shortage of capital, higher borrowing costs, and greater financial risks in the near future. With a significant drop in investment, U.S. businesses are facing a severe financial crisis. In response, many companies issued $430 billion in junk bonds in 2024, a 38% increase from the previous year, with the average interest rate on loans rising to 9.6%. This pushed the financial costs of companies higher, making it harder for them to maintain operations and expand. A specific example is Hartwell Tech, a manufacturing company in Boston, which lost $180 million in capital from China and had to borrow at an interest rate of 11.3% from private equity funds. Many large projects, such as the $8 billion battery factory in Michigan and the $3.1 billion robotics center in Nevada, were either delayed or canceled. This is a direct result of the lack of international capital and its powerful impact on the U.S. economy. To cope with the increased import tariffs from China, over $500 billion in Chinese goods were hit with a 22% tariff, causing the prices of consumer goods, especially household items, to rise significantly. The cost of household goods has increased by 16.7%, putting significant pressure on every American household, as they will have to spend an extra $1,950 this year. Furthermore, profits of companies in the S&P 500 fell sharply in Q4 2024, increasing only by 1.2%, a significant drop from 4.5% in Q3. Inflation remains at 3.6%, while wages have not kept up. Citizens are bearing the burden of rising living costs, while real income remains stagnant, directly affecting their daily lives. Not only has China frozen investments in the U.S., but it is also implementing a long-term strategy to restructure the global financial order. European companies such as BASF have invested $10 billion in China, while countries like France and Saudi Arabia have signed LNG contracts with China, bypassing the USD. This shows a significant shift in the way international payments are made, with China promoting its digital yuan and expanding its payment system in 13 countries. The increased use of the yuan instead of the USD in international transactions could weaken the USD's position in the global financial market. This will create a shock for economies that rely on the US dollar, as countries will have additional options besides the dollar to conduct international transactions. If this trend continues to grow, the US will face a decline in its global financial power. 53% of China's international transactions are now settled in yuan. The US dollar has hit a 3-year low, and prices for essential goods in the US have surged up to 15% in just 6 months. Is the dollar's global dominance quietly slipping away while most Americans remain unaware? The shift in global currency begins. For decades, the US dollar has been the bedrock of global trade. But that may be changing. China has become the top trading partner for more than 120 countries, with a total trade volume of $6.1 trillion, surpassing the US at $5.3 trillion. However, it's not just about the goods, it's about the currency. In a recent directive, China's central bank instructed its state-owned companies to prioritize the use of the yuan, RMB, in international trade. As a result, the share of US dollar usage in transactions with China has dropped from 83% to 43% within just a few years. This is more than symbolic. For instance, China and Saudi Arabia recently closed an energy deal denominated in yuan, a move that signals growing confidence in alternative financial systems, a declining dollar and rising consumer costs. This shift is already affecting American households. A smartphone that cost $800 last year may now sell for $940. Basic imported goods, such as clothing or electronics, are seeing price hikes of 10 to 15%. These increases are not solely driven by supply chain issues. They are compounded by the weakening dollar and rising tariffs on imported goods, particularly from China. To manage market instability, interest rates have been lowered, but this has further weighed on the dollar. As a result, American consumers are absorbing higher costs across the board, even as incomes remain flat. Will the traditional model of American consumption continue if everyday goods become less affordable? Consumer spending slows, economic pressures build. Recent economic indicators reveal early signs of strain. New orders for U.S. businesses have dropped by 22%. Exports fell nearly 28%. Consumer confidence has weakened significantly. This creates a challenging feedback loop. As prices rise, spending slows. Businesses respond with layoffs. Incomes fall. And spending contracts further. Many small enterprises are scaling back, while households begin cutting non-essential expenses. The ripple effects extend beyond individual homes, impacting broader economic stability. With demand falling and prices rising, can the economy sustain its current path? A new global system takes shape. This is not a temporary trend. It may signal a long-term realignment. China is expanding its international payment system called CIPS, designed to operate independently of traditional US-led financial channels. By integrating technologies like blockchain, this system aims to provide a secure, sanctions-resistant alternative for cross-border trade. If more countries begin trading in yuan, the global demand for US dollars will gradually decline. There will be less need to hold US Treasury bonds or use the dollar as a medium of exchange. And as global finance diversifies away from a single currency, the impact will be felt first by American consumers through the price tags on store shelves. Can a nation remain a global economic leader if its currency is no longer the preferred choice for trade? China has taken an unexpected move that could completely reshape the trade dynamics between the two largest economies in the world by rejecting 12,000 tons of US pork. Is this just a coincidence or part of China's long-term strategy? Why did China reject US pork? In March, the US government imposed a 172% tariff on pork imports from China, a move that likely strained the relationship between the two countries more than ever. Just 3 weeks later, China made an unexpected decision, canceling 12,000 tons of US pork worth over $35 million, despite the shipment being purchased and ready for export. Why would China cancel such a large shipment? There was no official announcement, just a brief notice. The answer may lie in China's trade strategy in response to the US tariffs. But is this a deliberate retaliation or merely an accidental incident? This could signal a deeper, more strategic move. Severe consequences for the US agricultural sector. The cancellation of this shipment has had serious consequences. The rejection of 12,000 tons of pork caused a loss of approximately $35 million for the US agricultural sector. Additionally, pork processing plants in Iowa and Minnesota, where over 60% of US pork exports are produced, have been left with surplus inventory. Pork prices plummeted, and hundreds of workers were laid off. Low-income families are facing skyrocketing food prices. Pork and many other food items have risen by 17% in just a few weeks. And it's not just consumers. small farms are also struggling to survive in these conditions. Farmers and consumers bear the brunt. It's not just large companies that are impacted. Farmers in areas like Iowa, North Carolina, and Minnesota are bearing the heavy consequences. They are unable to sell their products, and with prices plummeting, they can't sustain their operations. Many small farms, in particular, are struggling to survive this crisis. Some farms in Missouri have even filed for bankruptcy, simply because they couldn't sell their pork, while the value of their inventory collapsed. This situation not only affects U.S. farmers, but also pushes consumers into difficult circumstances. Rising prices for pork and other food products put significant pressure on low-income families. Brazil and Spain capture 1.1 billion market share, while the U.S. struggles with the cancellation of a $35 million pork shipment. Rival nations Brazil and Spain are seizing the opportunity to dominate China's pork market. In April alone, Brazil's pork exports to China surged by 28%, while Spain saw a 23% growth in orders from China. This is more than just a simple replacement. With strong strategies in place, Brazil and Spain are not only gaining market share, but also securing key trade agreements with China, solidifying their positions in the global agricultural industry. As of 2023, the U.S.'s market share in China dropped from 33% to just 19%, while Spain and Brazil significantly increased their share, totaling $1.1 billion in pork exports. This shift is not just a market competition change, but a strategic transfer of power and influence from the U.S. to these emerging competitors, China's long-term strategy, and how the U.S. can respond. China is implementing a long-term strategy to reduce its dependence on unstable sources like the U.S. They've signed long-term contracts with new partners such as Brazil and Spain, while also boosting investment in domestic agriculture to ensure food security. But can the U.S. respond? To minimize the damage, the U.S. needs to change its trade approach, expand markets, and renegotiate agreements to protect the interests of its farmers. Otherwise, it will continue to lose market share to emerging competitors. More importantly, stable policies and financial support will be crucial in helping farmers weather the storm. $48,000, the new average price for a Tesla Model Y. Interest rates have reached levels unseen in the United States for over 15 years. And while costs continue to climb, a silent shift driven by China is quietly reshaping the future of the American automotive sector. A direct hit. America's access to the Chinese market shuts down. 275,000 American-made vehicles were sold annually in China before the trade tensions began. Following the first wave of tariffs, sales dropped by nearly 50%. Today, with new import restrictions in place, U.S. automakers like Ford, GM, and Tesla are facing limited access to the world's largest auto market. China is not merely increasing tariffs, it is also restructuring its entire automotive supply chain to favor domestic brands such as BYD and NIO. In 2023 alone, BYD surpassed Tesla to become the world's largest electric vehicle manufacturer. Moreover, Chinese automakers are expanding aggressively into Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Yet these developments represent only the visible part of a much larger transformation. American consumers bear the burden. Vehicle prices rise each year. The average price of a new Tesla Y in the US stands at $48,000, the highest on record. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, and auto parts from China have significantly raised production costs. If current trends continue, new car prices could exceed $55,000 by 2025. The impact extends beyond new vehicles. Auto loan interest rates are now at their highest levels in 15 years. Meanwhile, used car prices have surged, driven by limited supply. What was once a symbol of American freedom, the automobile, is increasingly becoming a luxury. Even leasing, traditionally a more affordable option, is no longer providing significant relief due to tightened inventory and higher costs. As affordability declines, It prompts a crucial question: who is shouldering the heaviest economic burden? Detroit under strain, American manufacturing at risk. Ford and GM have reduced domestic production investments by billions of dollars within the past 18 months. Key manufacturing hubs such as Detroit, Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, once pillars of American industry, are now witnessing widespread factory shutdowns. When an auto plant closes, the ripple effects are far-reaching. Steel mills halt operations. Parts suppliers face bankruptcy. Transportation networks experience significant disruptions. Moreover, this strain is not limited to the automotive sector. The steel industry is absorbing heavy losses. The semiconductor and advanced technology sectors are also facing potential production disruptions. Without systemic reforms, there is growing concern that America could lose its remaining industrial strongholds. A strategic battle: control over raw materials. China currently controls over 70% of the global electric vehicle battery production. Beyond assembling vehicles, China dominates critical stages of the supply chain, refining lithium, cobalt, and rare earth minerals, developing a global EV infrastructure and export network. New EV models from companies like BYD are being introduced at prices starting as low as $11,000, a figure that remains out of reach for Ford, GM, and Tesla under current cost structures. If China were to tighten exports of rare earth elements, American automakers would face immediate material shortages, dramatically increasing production costs. And the impact would not be confined to automobiles, the high-tech sector. Military equipment manufacturing. If decisive action is not taken to develop resilient domestic supply chains, there's a real possibility that within the next 10 years, American brands could find themselves absent from the ranks of the world's top 5 automakers. China exposes fake negotiations, 45% tariffs, a phantom negotiation, and a series of unverified claims. Donald Trump declared he was negotiating directly with Chinese President Xi Jinping to resolve the trade war between the two nations. But then, a direct denial came from Beijing.
这些都是假消息。据我了解，中美双方并没有就关税问题进行磋商或谈判。
No negotiations, no agreement. Just Trump, talking to his reflection. Beijing emphasized, if they want to fight, they're ready for battle. If they want to negotiate, the door is open, but it must be respectful and equal. Does Trump really understand that in order to negotiate with China, he needs to stop with the speeches and start taking action? Trump continues to direct the negotiation drama. Despite being exposed, Trump remains unfazed. His reaction was a masterclass in misdirection. When reporters asked directly about China's denial of negotiations, he responded ambiguously,
Well, they had a meeting this morning, so I can't tell you. It doesn't matter who they is. We may reveal it later.
Who are they? Where was the meeting? It's unclear. The answer sounds like a mystery thriller, only missing the suspenseful music. And to heighten the story, Trump claimed foreign leaders were calling him, flattering him, begging him to sign trade deals.
These countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything. I'll do anything, sir.
A one-man show on stage. In reality, Xi Jinping isn't flattering him and hasn't even bothered picking up the phone. But for his domestic audience, especially loyal voters, this is the message he needs to send. Even though it's entirely baseless, legal action. Trump sued at home. When international critics speak out, Trump can ignore them. But when America speaks up, things change. 12 states, led by New York, filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, claiming he abused his power by imposing tariffs without congressional approval. New York Attorney General Letitia James stated, "The president does not have the authority to unilaterally impose tariffs through executive orders, social media, or administrative directives." The trade war, initially framed as an economic revival strategy, has led to a different reality. The U.S. economy remains unstable. Farmers and businesses bear the brunt, and lawsuits continue to mount. A report from the Peterson Institute for International Economics shows that the tariffs Trump imposed between 2018 and 2020 increased U.S. consumer costs by an average of $800 to $1,200 per year. More than 400,000 jobs in manufacturing and agriculture were affected by retaliatory tariffs from China. Furthermore, soybean exports, one of America's key exports to China, dropped by as much as 70% after failed negotiations. While Trump portrayed himself as a master negotiator, American consumers paid the price for everything, from washing machines and refrigerators to agricultural products. A report from the Peterson Institute for International Economics, this trade war has significantly impacted the U.S. economy. But who is truly winning? Will Trump admit his mistakes or continue to stand his ground? One thing is clear: every decision in this trade war has consequences, and those consequences will continue to unfold in the future.
I will not speak to the president's relationships with Jeff Bezos, but I will tell you that this is certainly a hostile and political action by Amazon.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them.
A new report from Punchbowl News says that Amazon is looking to avoid the blame for raising prices as a result of President Trump's new tariff.
But I imagine you do when it comes to tariffs.
We look at all the things that could impact consumers and customers.
$13 billion. Yes, you heard that right. Amazon had to restructure contracts worth $13 billion in just 60 days. Sounds crazy, right? But it's only the tip of the iceberg in this crushing tariff crisis. So, have you ever wondered why Amazon is slowly pulling out of the US market? And more importantly, how does this impact you, the everyday consumer? At the start of this year, tariffs on Chinese imports reached an astounding 145%. That's like America saying, if you want to sell here, you're going to pay through the nose. Because of this, Amazon had to restructure $13 billion worth of contracts in just 2 months. But then, in mid-May 2025, a surprising twist: the US and China agreed to cut tariffs down to 30%. From 145% to 30%. Quite a relief, right? But hold on, it's not that simple. The de minimis exemption, which allowed shipments under $800 to enter tariff-free, was removed. That means 85% of low-cost packages from China now face tariffs. The good news? The new tariffs on these small shipments were adjusted to a friendlier 54% or a flat $100 per package. So, some pressure eased, but small sellers and consumers still have to navigate these tricky waters. Imagine being a worker in Michigan or Ohio, states known for their industrial backbone, only to see your factory move to Vietnam, Malaysia, or Mexico. Why? Because it's cheaper there. In 2024, over 60% of new projects in electronics and consumer goods were launched in Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, U.S. manufacturing jobs dropped about 3%. Big companies like UPS cut tens of thousands of positions. This is no rumor. The global supply chain is shifting dramatically, and American workers face serious challenges ahead. We all love a good deal, but have you noticed that the price of children's car seats jumped by $100? Electronics, clothes, and shoes from overseas are up by about 15% on average. Feeling the pinch yet? Yale Budget Labs says the average American is losing roughly $2,800 in purchasing power this year thanks to tariffs and inflation. The recent tariff cut to 30% might ease things. But is it enough? If shoppers start buying pricier American-made products instead, are we entering a whole new ballgame? Have you noticed that Chinese goods aren't coming directly into the US anymore? Instead, they're rerouted through ports in Mexico, Vietnam, or Malaysia. Shipments through Mexican ports have doubled. Meanwhile, major US ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach are jammed up, with container backlogs up 25%, a total logistics nightmare. With tariffs down to 30%, will this trend ease? Will Chinese goods flood back? That's a big question on everyone's mind. But the fallout is bigger than prices and jobs. The entire logistics system is strained. Over 10,000 US port workers have been laid off in just 6 months. Consumers face higher prices and fewer choices. Small businesses are scrambling to survive as costs soar and customers tighten their belts. This crisis is far from over. The ripple effects will impact the economy, jobs, and your everyday shopping for months, maybe even years to come.